From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report. This weekend, I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. Trade wins as the administration celebrates the final approval of USMCA, but the market seemed unimpressed by the signing of the Phase 1 U.S.-China trade deal.
And I think the market was a bit surprised about the emphasis put on, at the market purchases.
That's as agriculture awaits more details of the deal.
In a broad sense, this agreement's a shot in the arm for U.S. agriculture.
MFP in 2020, Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue says yes and no. And in John's world,
to everything there is a season.
Now for the news. After 18 months of a trade war with China, there is now a truce. President Trump and the Chinese Vice Premier signing the Phase 1 trade agreement at the White House on Wednesday.
Today we take a momentous step, one that has never been taken before with China, toward a future of fair and reciprocal trade as we sign Phase 1 of the historic trade deal between the United States and China.
President Trump promoting the signing as a way of delivering economic justice for American workers. The big news coming out of this is ag. China has agreed to purchase and import, on average, at least $40 billion worth of U.S. food, ag, and seafood products annually for a total of at least $80 billion over the next 2 years.
China was doing $16 billion with the farmers, and they stopped. Why not? They're in a negotiation. So our people agreed to 20, and I said, no, make it 50. What difference does it make? Make it 50. They say, sir, our farmers can't produce that much. I said, I love our farmers. Let them tell me they can't do it. And I said, tell them to go out and buy a larger tractor, buy a little more land, but they'll be able to do it.
As the two sides have agreed based on the market demand in China, in line with market terms, Chinese businesses will purchase $40 billion of agricultural products from the United States annually. If the demand is strong, the companies may buy more.
President Trump says tariffs with China will remain in place until such time as both sides have a Phase 2 agreement, saying those are his bargaining chips. There are several key parts in the deal for producers besides China's purchase agreement of $40 billion in ag. There are also provisions for beef. Under the deal, China will expand the scope of beef products allowed to be imported, eliminating the age restrictions on cattle slaughtered for export to China and eliminating unnecessary cattle traceability requirements. Now, as for pork, China will also broaden the list of pork products eligible for import to include processed products like ham. Rice is also listed for importation, along with U.S. fruits and vegetables like avocados, blueberries, potatoes, and barley. Now, what's not in the deal? Specific dollar amounts of each of those products. Well, ag economists saying despite not having all the specifics, you can't ignore the importance of the deal with China.
It's a big deal for U.S. agriculture. It means that China is back in our marketplace. They're now regular buyers once again. We don't know exactly how the Chinese will make their programs work, but we assume that they may have duty-free licensing, which means that the Chinese will keep their tariffs in place, but give the opportunity for their importers to look at which commodities they will be buying under a zero-duty import program.
Bossi reminding everyone the Chinese have 30 days to get the program operational. He says he's hopeful China will buy a few U.S. ag goods before their Lunar New Year holiday on January 25th. We're going to have much more on the deal with China coming up in this week's panels with our marketing experts. What about MFP? Well, USDA says expect the final MFP 2.0 payment this year, but don't bank on MFP 3.0 this year. USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue, in an interview with Ag Day's Clinton Griffiths, was asked whether the ag sector can expect the third tranche of MFP2 payments. He said yes.
My expectation is that the president will direct OMB to fulfill that third tranche of the commitment of the 2019 MFP payment. Now, I've told our producers all along that they shouldn't expect a 2020 MFP because they told us all along they'd rather have trade, not aid. And that's what the president has delivered.
Well, another trade win this week, the U.S.-Canada-Mexico agreement passing the Senate, now in the hands of the president. The plan passing in the U.S. Senate on Thursday. Republicans wanted to push the deal through the chamber before the start of the president's impeachment trial. That's after passing in the U.S. House last month. Both Republicans and Democrats saying the deal is an improvement over NAFTA, which has been in place since 1994. For producers, the new deal gives U.S. dairy farmers more market opportunities in Canada. U.S. poultry producers will have expanded access to Canada for chicken, turkey, and eggs. The updated agreement also includes provisions to labor. Well, fresh off the signing of the deal with China, President Trump will address the American Farm Bureau Federation's convention. This will be his third year in a row. The address scheduled for Sunday in Austin, Texas. AFBF President Zippy Duvall releasing a statement saying, quote, "We are grateful that he has made agricultural issues a priority and look forward to welcoming him to Austin at a time when there is much to talk about, from trade progress to import regulatory reforms," end quote. Also scheduled to attend this weekend are Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue and EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler. Well, it was a cold end to the week weather-wise and some major snow on the way this weekend. We'll have details from meteorologist Mike Hoffman when we come back. Welcome back. Meteorologist Mike Hoffman joins us now from the South Bend studios. Mike, the way 2020 has started, it looks like it will be another active weather year.
Thanks, Tyne. It really has. My concern is this, that we go into a colder weather pattern and still stormy weather pattern for the second half of winter, and that continues into early spring. I hope not. We don't want a repeat of last year. We're already starting off wet, as you can see. But most of the middle of the country, most of the Corn Belt, definitely on the wet side already. We don't need any more real storms as we head toward spring. You can see some dry areas, central mountains into the Pacific Northwest. Other than that, a lot of the country is wetter than normal for this time of the year. Now, the long-term drought, we still have some areas in Texas, especially South Texas, that are severe or extreme drought, but there are kind of pockets here and there. Most of it's gone in the southeast and mid-Atlantic. We have some Four Corner region areas as well, and a little bit of dryness still in the Pacific Northwest, but nothing major at this point. Here's the jet stream. This is a shot of Arctic air into the eastern half of the country. Now, obviously, it's not going to be pure Arctic air all the way to Florida, but you're going to turn pretty chilly this week for the first time this winter. And you can see that trough kind of digs in, and there's very cold air over Canada. So any little excuse for it to come south, it comes south easily. So my point with saying that is, even though it looks like it might be warming up dramatically here in the middle of the country, not so sure. This cold air that has been building and building over Canada is pressing southward, and it's hard to dislodge it. And then we see another trough, another storm system as we head through the end of the week into the middle of the country with a shot of colder air coming in behind that once again as we head through next weekend. So still a pretty active weather pattern. Nothing major to start this week, but we just got done with a big storm system, and what is lingering behind it is some lake effect snow. Some of that's on the heavy side as we start the week. Still a lingering shower in South Florida, and the next system coming into the Pacific Northwest with some showers out that way. Taking a look at Wednesday, you can see the frigid air kind of leaving, trying to anyway. Still pretty cold for the mid-Atlantic through the Great Lakes into the southern prairies of Canada, and chilly into Florida for this time of the year. Lots of sunshine in the east, though. Gathering storm systems out west, as you can see, with some rain and mountain snows. And we go to Friday. There's that storm system, another wet system with lots of rain in the southern Mississippi, central Mississippi Valley. Where that rain-snow line is, hard to tell right now, but there's still cold air up there, and that's trying to press. So that's something we'll have to watch. A little bit of rain and snow in the Pacific Northwest as well. Here's the 30-day outlook for temperatures. I'm going below normal for the central and northern Mississippi Valley, the Great Lakes, the Northeast, and the Northwest. Above normal along the Gulf Coast and much of Texas. 30-day outlook for precipitation above normal where that cold air is battling with the warmth, and that's the mid-Atlantic back into Texas. Below normal for the northern plains and many places out west. Tyne?
Thanks, Mike. Well, when we come back, it looks like soybeans didn't get the memo that the U.S. and China have signed a Phase 1 trade agreement. So why aren't the markets impressed? Kevin Dooling and John Payne join me from the agribusiness desk after the break. Well, I'm excited for our marketing discussion this week because there was so much going on in the markets with trade. We have Kevin Dooling as well as John Payne joining us this weekend from Kansas City. All right, let's start with the obvious. China, the U.S. signed a Phase 1 trade agreement, yet the market is acting disappointed. John, do we want more meat? Why isn't the trade excited about the signing of this agreement?
Well, I think, again, easy answer is you buy the rumor, sell the fact, right? And we saw the run up here in the last couple of weeks. Prices have, I don't say jumped, but we have seen a little premium added. And I think the lack of enthusiasm with details around how quickly these are going to happen, what exactly is going to happen, and then on the other side of it, China didn't really behave outside of some enthusiasm on their end. They haven't really dictated what they're doing with their tariffs. And we're still battling the same issues we battled with before this whole trade deal started. And tariffs on DDGs, tariffs on ethanol. What's going to happen with that? I think that's probably what we're kind of waiting on, and it's going to be a waiting game for now.
And Kevin, the vice premier made it clear in his talk at the White House during the signing that they will base their buys on market conditions. So if the price is right, maybe they buy a little bit more than 40 billion, maybe they buy maybe a little bit less. Is that adding to the skepticism from trade overall?
Yes, but I think they misinterpreted that a little bit. What that tells me is, figured out if they're going to really increase their spending for ags for what, over the 21, get up to 40 billion. Yeah. If they do that, they're not going to jump up and down and say, hey, we're getting ready to buy here. They're going to play possum. They're going to step back. They're going to let the social media feuds begin, and then they'll step in quietly, like right after USDA reports, something like that, and they'll acquire. They're not going to forecast it, right? So.
Yeah. So if you look at it, soybeans down 20 cents in a couple days. It looks like, hey, that could be a discount for China to come into the market to buy. Do you think in some way China was driving the market lower?
Well, I think the comment you made earlier that they are going to be dictating market conditions. So when you shift to, okay, who's our competition? Well, it's Brazil, South America, and they're sitting on a massive crop right now. So I kind of think we're dealing with a market a little bit more like last year in that the U.S. is going to get all the Chinese business. Brazil and Argentina are going to essentially supply the rest of the world. So those spreads can't get too far away here. And with Brazil having this big crop, you're seeing obviously some selling stepping in.
So for our major commodities, when you look at soybeans, wheat, meat, some of that, are we priced competitively right now?
It depends. It depends what, like with wheat, we are in certain, like with soft white wheat, we are. They like that prior to the trade war. With hard red spring, we are if they can get the right quality mix. That's the hard part, is the protein. With the meats, yeah, where else are they going to get it? Everybody else prices exploded except ours. So yes, the meats, we are competitive. Corn and beans, not quite so much. Corn, you can't find it anyway. So they're not going to be able to import corn at the moment. So
during the signing, the vice premier made mention of a Chinese proverb talking about how basically, to set the stage of the deal, you've got to watch what happens quickly in this agreement. And we're going to see this move quickly. Yet we're running up against the Chinese New Year. And is that typically a time when Chinese buyers are rather quiet and take holiday?
Well, on the pork side, yeah, and they would have made those purchases already. So what they'll be looking for is now really kind of getting into their summer markets. But going back to what Kevin said on corn and specifically soybeans, they're flooded with product right now. They've been buying a lot, and I would expect that they're going to be in here buying breaks. They're not going to project what they're doing. But that said, I still think it comes down to U.S. acreage for next year. So once we get into the second half of February, I think the market's going to start to look at, okay, what needs to be planted, what are they buying, and that's where I think the prices can jump. So we pause a little bit here, but I don't think we back off much. And like Kevin said, in the case of corn, we're the cheapest in the world. I think we're going to see exports pick up here. That would be my thought.
Okay, Kevin, so what do you want to see to signal that, all right, the trade is sinking its teeth into this deal, there's not this skepticism, and we are seeing some belief that this is actually going to happen?
I think you'll see it in the cash market first. The futures of kind of the price discovery with 70-75% of futures being traded with computers now. You're going to see them last. I think the cash market's going to dictate. If you see it start to move, then that's the sign to me that things are happening behind the scenes.
I think you got to look at the China U.S. dollar swap. So when things get bad between the U.S. and China as far as relations go, you see the dollar index or the dollar versus the yuan get weaker. And in the last couple of weeks, we've seen that strengthen quite a bit. And you see markets like cotton really jump. So I think as long as that yuan stays below 7 to 1, you're going to see the commodity markets hang in.
All right, well, what could China be buying? A lot of speculation. We'll talk to Kevin as well as John later on the show about that. Plus, John hinted at it, but what is the market focused on now that we have the signing of the Phase 1 trade agreement complete? We'll talk about that coming up on U.S. Farm Report. Well, it's already been an unusual year for John Phipps. He joins us now from the farm.
To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. Many of my generation immediately associate that quotation with the Byrds' 1965 hit, Turn, 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 even though it was actually written and recorded by Pete Seeger in 1959. It comes, of course, the lyrics from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. The song and lyrics popped into my head this week as an unusual combination of weather trends here in central Illinois caused me to find myself in the field doing tillage that didn't get done last fall. I decided it was dry and firm enough to put our vertical tillage tool, which has been sitting out since last November when we used it last, into this shed, and that could only be accessed by driving over a pristine sod on a rented farm. On the way to the shed, I passed by the one field I didn't get finished, and my windshield soil survey prompted me to pull in, unfold, and see what happened. Nothing like a little empirical data. It's a 600-acre field, however, and to my astonishment, I spent the best part of 4 days last week almost finishing it before that string of abnormally great weather ended. Maybe it's my age, or the old sayings like, winter is when the ground sleeps, but for whatever reason, I could not shake a mildly uncomfortable feeling that this was not the time for that purpose. Meanwhile, I could see on the horizon two neighbors doing tillage pretty much the same, one fixing tile, and one neighbor had a combine laboring through the last corner of a cornfield. A few miles from me, some farmers were applying anhydrous ammonia. We've had a few odd windows like this before in the winter, but never a stretch that long when the tillage went that well the first week of January. Aaron reassured me that the ground was working fine and getting 500 acres done in January is just a gift. But for whatever reason, the angle of the sun, the length of the daylight, or just the proximity of the recent holiday season, it was vaguely creepy. Maybe there is something to the idea of the ground resting. It's more likely, though, this is an instinct more about farmers than farms. The familiar rhythm of seasons underlies much of our sense of purpose and tradition, I think. Maybe tillage in January on our farm is not an agronomic heresy, but getting this thing put away eased a vaguely unsettling emotional undercurrent. That said, I still can't get that song out of my head now.
Thanks, John. Well, up next, a bit of history. We'll have Tractor Tales when we come back.
Got equipment to sell privately but tired of scams and hassles? Visit MachineryPete.com and click Sell Mine. MachineryPete.com, the simple and secure way to buy and sell equipment online.
Welcome back to Tractor Tales, folks. This week we got a story of a family-owned Farmall F20 from Washington State.
We have the 1935 Farmall that I grew up on. My dad bought this tractor in 1937 and farmed with it until about 61 or 2. And my brother and I both started driving it when we were about 11, 12 years old. And so it's a real, it's a real heirloom. 99, we moved out here. I wanted a place with enough land that I could build a shop. And once I had that built, I decided I'd go look for it and found it back near Manhattan, right where it had been with an old collector that had kept it, and it was still running. But it had been used until about 15 years before, and he was still using it to pull stuff around on his collection. And in the late 50s, the last time my dad overhauled it, he had put 4-inch sleeves and up the bore 1/4 inch. And aluminum pistons in it. I had to replace the sleeves and rings, of course, take a couple of thousands out of the shims out of the rods, but it was fine, and then it ran just like new. The original horsepower rating on these with kerosene was 20, which is the F20. But every farmer like my dad had upgraded them when gasoline became available, put on the gas manifold, took off the dual fuel. And then he and a lot of other farmers did what Dad had done, and that's upgrade to those 4-inch sleeves. And they went to 36-inch wheels, took the 28s off, because with that power, they could plow a lot faster with the same amount of gas. It's the original clutch. Nothing has changed in the gear, transmission, all original. Still fine, just like new.
Well, when we come back, Phase 1 trade deal with China really did not impress much of the market. It's almost a disappointment. So is the trade war over, and what's next? That's our Farm Journal report right after the break.
Closed captioning is brought to you by BASF. Grow smart with BASF. We create chemistry. U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
Welcome back. Well, there was so much anticipation heading into the Phase 1 trade deal signing this week with China, but with still some unanswered questions lingering, some in agriculture did not really seem impressed. So where do we go from here? And is this the start of the end for the trade war? That's our Farm Journal report this week.
Wednesday marked a historic day. As China and the U.S. signed the Phase 1 trade agreement, the stock market hit record highs. Agriculture also celebrating the win.
In a broad sense, this agreement's a shot in the arm for U.S. agriculture.
While the trade agreement fueled market movement in New York, traders with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange didn't seem impressed. Soybeans even closed down double digits Wednesday. That's as a comment from China casted doubt on the quantity of U.S. agricultural products China will buy this year.
As the two sides have agreed based on the market demand in China, in line with market terms, Chinese businesses will purchase $40 billion of agricultural products from the United States annually. If the demand is strong, the companies may buy more.
University of Missouri's Seth Meyer says China stating the amount it buys will be dictated by market conditions was a bit of a shock to the overall markets.
I think the market was a bit surprised about the emphasis put on, at the market purchases and then the back weighting, which really means this has to go smoothly for the first 12 months before things get really rolling. And in the back end, it's quite a lot.
Meyer says currently the price isn't right for China on major ag goods, including soybeans.
Right now, we're not all that price competitive. So I think that the market, we got a little backloading, a little statements on price competitiveness, and that put folks off a bit.
But China did say pending market conditions, it's promising to buy a large amount of U.S. agricultural goods. And the president also highlighting China's strong commitment to agriculture.
And it's be spending much more than $200 billion over the next 2 years, including up to $50 billion just on agriculture alone.
The U.S. Trade Representative's office says the 2-year deal comes with a price tag of China buying $80 billion worth of U.S. agricultural goods. That's over the next 2 years. That will average out to be close to $40 billion in 2020 and then another $40 billion in 2021. Purdue University economist Holly Wang says the promise for large agricultural buys is a huge step forward for U.S. agriculture.
That actually compared to the current export, and it creates a new market, about 1/3 of the size of the entire U.S. agriculture export. So that's very significant.
While the deal did not specify how much China is promising to buy of each good, it did include a long list of what.
We did get, as we expected, kind of a list of what counts. But it's a big list. It's a big, broad list. So you can't really narrow down, and it certainly doesn't say how many soybeans they'll buy this year or next.
Without much meat, that also produced disappointment from traders.
If the markets were expecting the agreement would say we're going to buy X, metric ton of soybeans by this date, it just didn't happen. And so the way the deal's structured, it may not be until the end of this year before we truly see some large purchases that would go on to fulfill that $12.5 billion increase over the 2017 levels.
Groups like Ag Resource Company says while the details are vague, they think the heart of the deal will benefit soybeans, pork, meats, and dairy most.
We speculate it'll be upwards of maybe 35 million metric tons of soybeans, a couple million tons of cotton, maybe 5 million tons of corn, 2 to 4 million metric tons of wheat, maybe 5 million tons of DDGs, and 2 million tons of ethanol. Now, that will only encompass about $30 billion, slightly less than that. Other goods will come into there, but that's pet food, it's lumber products, it's all of that.
Wang says traditional U.S. agricultural commodities will benefit first. Then the mix of goods heading to China could spark new interest.
But it also opened doors for newer commodities, and especially processed, higher value added commodities. So the industry need to really grasp this 2 years to have its feet set in Chinese market, because after the 2 years, they will have to compete with everyone else.
Nye says whether it's core agricultural commodities or more specialty goods, there's room for growth, especially when it comes to dairy and the U.S. export market share into China.
That's an $11 billion market, and we only have a 5% market share. So seems like there should be some opportunity there. You know, the EU has 50% market share.
American Farm Bureau shows New Zealand had 38% market share for dairy in 2018.
If you just displaced the Kiwis, that's $4 billion.
Nye says it's not just dairy. The U.S. share of vegetable exports to China is only 5%. That's an area where Thailand has 69% market share. And for soybeans, the United States' 18% market share in 2018 pales in comparison to the 75% for Brazil. No matter what China buys, Meyer points out the Phase 1 agreement is a 2-year deal, and the market will be on edge watching what exactly China purchases.
Anybody that thought this was going to be resolved and the signing of this and the beginning of the trade deal, I think we got another 12 months of just probably lingering uncertainty.
While the market still faces some uncertainty, Bossi says you can't discount the fact the Phase 1 trade deal with China is pivotal.
As we think this agreement going forward, it's a big deal for U.S. agriculture. It means that China is back in our marketplace. They're now regular buyers once again.
As the Phase 1 agreement gets implemented, Wang says it's a positive step for trade relations.
This one is a good indicator and a good initial success for this stage, making a peace instead of a war.
More than just trade, Ohio State economist Ian Sheldon says the Phase 1 agreement is bigger than just agriculture, especially when it comes to protecting intellectual property rights.
If you want to invest in China and form a joint venture, that the Chinese and the Chinese government and firms won't force American and other firms for that matter to hand over their technology. It would be important. Those are important protocols in the agreement and were one of the fundamental reasons why we began a trade war with China. But enforcing those commitments, I think, is going to be quite important.
The agreement also marks a key step towards a possible end to the ongoing trade war.
Now, this has been something we've been waiting for the last 18 months. It was back in June of 2018 that this trade war really erupted. It's taken 18 months of mudslinging back and forth, but we're now to a point where we've got a $40 billion agreement.
But as the cloud of trade uncertainty lingers, there's no indication if the trade war is over or not. But there's hope and optimism a trade deal could revive exports and agriculture.
Now, during the signing, China said it's committed to following through on its promises in this deal, but many analysts and economists say enforcement will be key. So after the text of the agreement was released, Ag Trader Talks' Garrett Toy pointed out it states in the agreement that if China fails to comply, the U.S. can impose or reimpose tariffs, but China cannot retaliate with tariffs. However, China can leave the agreement. But as several economists said, it will be key to see how this deal plays out over the next few weeks and the next 2 years. All right, when we come back, what else is the market watching right now besides China? Our marketing roundtables kick back off next. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Kevin and John rejoining me for a marketing discussion. We talked a lot about China in our first roundtable. And before we move past that, John, first, when you look at this deal, I know we don't know quantity of exactly what China's going to buy of each ag good, but if you would speculate, What do you think China will be coming to the market to buy this year?
I think the JCI numbers that they talked about, was it 2-3 weeks ago, that kind of awkward Chinese website that gets published every now and then, they said 45 million metric tons of beans. That's a lot. And they're going to be buying massive amounts of pork. I would guess anywhere between 30 and 50,000 metric tons a week. And I think you're going to start to see them start to pick up on cotton purchases as well. Ethanol is the one we want to see, in my opinion. Ethanol and DDGs. I think that'll change the dynamic of feed markets right now to a certain degree. I don't think they need to buy a lot of wheat to get the markets going in that sense. I think there's a story there already. But in the case of me, if I was looking to be bullish corn, you really want to see the end-using products get bought.
Well, apparently they paved the way to buy more U.S. chicken feet. That was a good sign.
All right.
Anything else, Kevin, that you're watching that you think China will come to the market to buy in 2020?
It's hard to say. I mean, if they've got to come up with that 40 billion number, you've got to factor in, the fresh fruit market, like the cherries. You got to factor in the hazelnuts. I mean, you can add a lot of value quick. And in reading that report last night on the flight in, or the trade deal, there's a lot of wording on live cattle, being shipped over in the genetics pool that we have here in the U.S. And so it's a big deal. I mean, it's going to take time. And we saw the, last winter, we saw the outside money basically exit the ag space. Basically, it's either because of the trade war or the fear of missing out on the stock market. That psychological hangover is now missing, or thank goodness, is gone with this deal. And so at least changes that tide and it says, okay, maybe that money starts to look at us again as undervalued.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you look at this is a big deal. Let's move past China, but real quick before we do, it's I think it's frustrating for a lot of producers to watch because it was all about the signing of this trade deal. Boom, it happens, and we see major commodities down some double digits for multiple days. It's frustrating.
I hear you. I understand the short-term action's not appealing, but this is a huge deal. I mean, I don't think it can be understated how big of a deal it is. And while the rest of the country kind of focuses on politics and impeachment, this slides onto the radar. I mean, these are the world's #1 and #2 economies. You have the most dynamic consumer economy in the planet that's going to be that way for the next 20 years. I mean, if we can establish good relations and get in with trade partners, I mean, this can change the game. It doesn't have to happen right away. So my advice would be don't get pessimistic if prices fall here in the short term. I think you're going to have a lot of opportunities. And in my opinion, down the road, this is something that could be looked back and say, why did we do this? We're essentially selling our stuff and having inflation in the U.S. We could use these goods, right?
Right, yeah. Well, it's frustrating to watch some of the markets, but we got some green with wheat. What was the story with wheat this week, and what has been the story as of late?
Well, the wheat export balance sheet is extremely tight, and we fed a lot of wheat in the U.S. The U.S. is the only country with any kind of product left as an exporter at the end of the year, and we don't know how much we fed. The feed usage number is always off. So what I'm seeing is all the other countries, the exporter, major six, the prices are moving up quickly. We're just basically following suit. The EU is on stage right now to be the prime exporter. We are next, and we've seen our sales, really boom the last 6-7 weeks. So,
and an announcement from Russia, a change up in Russian leadership. How does that change the game?
Well, I mean, that's the game right there. If the Russian ruble can strengthen on anything against the dollar, that'll really help. And they came out this week and mentioned the 20 million metric ton quota for this year, and that's a huge news as well. And just take a look, look at our soft red wheat stocks, the balance sheet on that. It's really, really tight. What we need to do is start moving some hard red wheat, winter wheat, spring wheat. That's where the supplies are. Double what we typically grow. So if you're China, that's what we're hoping for, I guess.
So real quick, longer term, are you bullish when it comes to some of these wheat markets?
Yeah, very short term. I think it looks good for the next 3 or 4 months look great.
Okay.
Now, China, I don't know what China's going to do. Okay. I assume if they come in, that's going to be great. Next year, there's no room for error. If Russia has a perfect crop, prices stay where we are. Yeah. If we have any hiccup at all, we're going to move a lot higher.
Okay. Well, USMCA, that got passed this week. We didn't even talk about that much, but I feel like we've talked about that quite a bit of what we could see benefit and just really how it's holding kind of that footing on the exports that we've already seen. So,
but it's a big deal. I mean, it's just again because it hasn't moved the market short term. Don't get too frustrated. I mean, I think in the long run, the kind of like a tire spinning, it'll catch traction at some point.
All right, thank you both. We appreciate it. We need to take a quick break, and we'll be back with much more U.S. Farm Report.
To help achieve your personal best yield, try Delaro fungicide for corn and soybeans.
Well, it won't be long before spring thaw begins, drawing folks outdoors. And researchers are spending time in some parts of America's premier rivers trying to understand what's killing freshwater mussels. Clinton Griffiths has that story.
Running 300 miles through Appalachia, the Clinch River is one of the most important rivers for freshwater mussels in the world.
When you look at the total picture of the environment here in Southwest Virginia and down into the southeast, you've got one of the richest biodiversity spots in the entire world.
But scientists are rushing to discover the cause of a massive mussel die-off on the Clinch. They're also trying to discover whether it's related to similar mussel die-offs in at least 6 U.S. rivers and several others around the world.
That means that this mussel has probably only been dead for 24 to 48 hours at the most.
Richard and his team are searching the river in northeastern Tennessee for recently dead pheasant shell mussels. The rocky bottom is littered with the white shells of the dead.
This is a pheasant shell, Actinonius pectorosa. This is the species that we've been the most concerned about with the die-off in the Clinch River.
46 different species of mussels and 133 species of fish live here. The pheasant shell mussel, until recently, was one of the most abundant species on the river.
And so in 2016, before we saw the major problem emerge, we had approximately 94,000 pheasant shell mussels that lived in a 200-meter stretch of the river right behind me here. Now, as of 2019, we have less than 14,000 pheasant shell that live in that same stretch.
Freshwater mussels can filter around 8 to 10 gallons of river water each day, cleaning it of algae, silt, and even heavy metals, helping make a better environment for fish, amphibians, plants, and bugs.
First and foremost, you lose that water filtering effect. So all the stuff that's in the water that gets pulled down by mussels and transformed into food for everything else, that effect would disappear immediately. And so you'd have cloudier, more turbid water. You'd be more prone to algae blooms.
Over the past century, mussel populations everywhere have declined steeply due to pollution and habitat loss. Yet the current decline looks to be something different, maybe a pathogen, maybe something else.
One of the first questions that comes up when we tell people we have dying mussels is, could this be caused by climate change? Is this due to pollution? And the answer is probably always somewhere in the middle. Even if we pinpoint a single specific pathogen or disease that is the reason that the pheasant shells are dying in the Clinch River right now, there's probably more to it than that.
The search continues as answers so far have continued to disappear downstream.
All right, when we come back, we all make mistakes and forget things.
1935 or 1948? Well, I was close.
Well, we're all human, right? Even in the case of John Phipps. He joins us now with customer support.
Well, this week's customer support is a straightforward correction to an unforced error. From Ann Simmons, the staff director of the House Agriculture Committee. I shared the recent commentary on the Farm Bill with Colin Peterson, chair of the House Ag Committee. He's been expressing similar concerns. He did ask me about your comment about a 1935 act, which led to remind him that the CCC Charter Act was enacted by Congress in 1948. The Commodity Credit Corporation itself was created by presidential executive order in 1933. The Charter Act is the authority that was used to do MFP and other trade aid purchases. One of the sections had a limitation on it put on its use by appropriators for a few years, but that limitation was eliminated in a recent appropriations bill, and that's a whole other story. And thank you for your expertise and the correction. I assume that you, like most people today, are significantly younger than me, so let me at least explain how this type of error occurs. When I wrote that script, 1935 just popped into my mind and the rest of my brain said, sure, why not? I've got a lot of dates stored in there and some of them get misfiled over the years. This particular error is even odder because the last time I spoke about MFPs in August, I looked up the 1948 Act to show the section in question. My editors in Tyne usually quietly save me from these types of blunders, but Tyne doesn't get to see the commentary until it's all edited and ready for broadcast. And I do that work here at home, so I can't even spread the blame around. I know that both Tyne and I would welcome Congressman Peterson's insights into this new farm policy creation process and the rest of that story to which you allude. As I write, farmers and farm organizations are pleading with the White House for the third tranche of MFPs while paying far less attention to the sign-up in process for the current farm program. The question that stays with me is how the heck does this mechanism for subsidies go away? Why won't any president in the future use this apparently legal helicopter money scheme on any pretext whatsoever? Have we quietly and permanently changed how a huge chunk of farm policy and expenditures are decided? One final question, as a favor, since by now it's obvious my memory has some issues. Could anyone in your office give me a hint as to when my anniversary is?
John, don't bank on me reminding you when your anniversary is. It's hard for me to even remember mine. All right, remember, if you have questions or comments for John, you can email him at mailbag@usfarmreport.com. Well, it was a cold end to the week for some. We'll show you in From the Farm next. Well, I know some of you are seeing snow out your window right now, but it was a cold end of the week for some of our viewers. So just how cold? Well, Brad Hahn in South Dakota says it was negative 12 degrees on Thursday, but he said there was a silver lining in temps like that. The steers actually come to the bunk better. Look at them all lined up. Negative 12. I just don't think I'm built for that. Well, that's all the time we have for this weekend. We're so glad you tuned in. From all of us at U.S. Farm Report, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to tune in next week as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone, and stay warm.
Closed captioning is brought to you by BASF. Grow smart with BASF. We create chemistry. U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.